Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Back to Revival series channel. We are here to discuss some important and hot topics of current affairs, which will be helpful for you in both written and SSB interview. So, today we are discussing an important change proposed by the government in India's rural employment system. For nearly 2 decades, rural employment in India has been supported by a law called the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, commonly known as MGNREGA. This scheme was introduced in 2005 with a clear promise that every rural household willing to do unskilled manual work would get at least 100 days of employment in a year. This opening idea is important because MGNREGA was not just a welfare scheme. It was a legal guarantee, meaning employment was a right, not charity. For millions of rural households, especially during droughts, floods, or economic slowdown, MGNREGA became a lifeline. However, after almost 20 years, the government believes that this framework has become outdated. According to the article, the center is now looking to replace MGNREGA with a new proposal called the Village-Based Guaranteed Rural Employment Scheme, or VB-GRAM bill. His proposed law aims to change both how rural jobs are provided and how they are funded. On the surface, it looks attractive because the guaranteed employment days are being increased from 100 to 125 days in a financial year. But when we look deeper, the nature of this guarantee is very different. One of the biggest changes is related to funding. Under MGNREGA, the union government pays the entire wage cost for unskilled labor and most of the material cost. States mainly handle implementation. But under the VB-GRAM bill, states will now be required to share the wage burden. This is significant because many states are already under financial stress. After the introduction of GST, states lost many independent sources of revenue. They now depend heavily on central transfers. So asking states to fund rural employment could limit how effectively the scheme is implemented. Another major proposal in the bill is the introduction of a 60-day pause in employment during peak agricultural seasons, such as sowing and harvesting. The government argues that this is necessary to ensure adequate availability of farm labor during these crucial periods. The logic here is that if MGNREGA work continues during peak farming seasons, laborers may choose government work over farm work, leading to labor shortages in agriculture. However, critics argue that this pause weakens the very idea of employment guarantee. Rural households need income security throughout the year, not only when agriculture is inactive. The article then points out an important data trend. Even though government allocation for MGNREGA has increased over the years, the actual number of workdays provided per household has gradually declined. For example, the average days of employment per household has fallen from over 50 days to nearly 35 days in recent years. This shows a gap between government claims and ground reality. More money does not necessarily mean more work, which raises concerns about inefficiency, delayed payments, and administrative bottlenecks. The article also explains how demand-based employment is being diluted. Under MGNREGA, work is provided based on demand from households. If work is not given within 15 days, workers are entitled to unemployment allowance. But under the VB-GRAM bill, the center proposes a normative allocation system. This means the center will decide in advance how much money and how many job days each state will receive, based on fixed parameters. This is a major shift from a bottom-up to a top-down approach. Instead of responding to real unemployment on the ground, states will be constrained by predetermined limits. If a state provides employment beyond the allocated amount, it may not be reimbursed. This change gives more power to the center and reduces the flexibility of states. It also weakens the legal right to work, turning it into a budget-controlled scheme rather than a demand-driven guarantee. The article further highlights that India's agricultural calendar is not uniform. Sowing and harvesting seasons differ across states and even across districts. Therefore, imposing a uniform 60-day pause across the country may not work in practice. For instance, While one state may be in the sowing season, another may be facing lean agricultural months. A one-size-fits-all pause could harm workers in regions where agriculture does not provide sufficient employment. Next, the article discusses the introduction of Viksit Gram Panchayat plans. Under this system, employment planning will be done at the village level, and projects will be aligned with national development goals such as water conservation, infrastructure creation, climate resilience, and rural assets. While this sounds progressive, it also indicates a shift in focus. MGNREGA was primarily designed as an income support and employment guarantee scheme. The new framework focuses more on asset creation and long-term development, possibly at the cost of immediate income security. Another important proposal is the replacement of traditional job cards with Gram Rozgar guarantee cards. These cards will be issued to adult members of rural households willing to work. Special cards will be issued for women, particularly vulnerable groups, and transgender persons. This step aims to improve inclusion and digital record-keeping. However, replacing job cards also symbolically marks the end of MGNREGA as we know it. Towards the end, the article talks about budgetary realities. For the current financial year, the government has allocated 86,000 crore for MGNREGA. However, the Rural Development Ministry estimates that actual demand could exceed 1.5 lakh crore. This gap between allocation and demand shows that rural distress and unemployment are still serious issues. In such a situation, reducing guarantees and shifting financial burden to states raises serious policy concerns. In conclusion, the article argues that while the VB Gram Bill is presented as a reform, it fundamentally alters the philosophy of rural employment in India. It increases central control, reduces demand-based guarantees, shifts costs to states, and introduces pauses in employment. The key question the article leaves us with is this: should rural employment be treated as a strict legal right responding to people's needs, or as a controlled development program limited by budgets and administrative convenience? This debate will shape the future of rural livelihoods in India.